Victory Garden. He is here today to talk about his special way of gardening. My pleasure to present you with Mr. Paul.
Well, thank you very much. It's kind of funny. I was handed this remote control and said, the chap who gave it to me said, don't press that button there. And I can't help but thinking, I'm going to do it. I know I'm going to do it. So terrible. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have gone anywhere near it. But that's the way it is. Well, this talk is really kind of, I got a chance last year to reflect on 50 years of gardening. I can remember, I'm 56 this year. I remember when I was a little 5-year-old, my mum and dad used to push us all in the garden and do all kinds of chores. I'd have to say very reluctantly. My boys are exactly the same. I have 2 boys who are 18 and 16, and it's very reluctant that they want to garden. What I'm going to show you, though, is it's very important to get people involved. We don't always enjoy the things early on, but it does create a foundation from which we really do get an immense amount of enjoyment. And I certainly have in my 55, 56 years of gardening. I can't say there's anything really better I enjoy more than being out on a spring day with everything coming back to life again. All right, let's promotion things. The Victory Garden, like all PBS things, are suffering from lack of sponsorship. Money is very tight. All these media things have changed. You can watch television on the internet, you can download it, you can stream it on your phone. It's very tough to ensure that we're going to get good programming. But PBS for 32 years did produce the Victory Gardens, or 34 I should say. It's a great show and they need funding, so if you can support your local PBS, whatever it is, please do so. All right, let's move on. It starts being a youngster in a big, big family. This is me in the pram, or perambulator, buggy, I think you call it over here. We were always very envious of anything to do with garden machines and gadgets. I was very lucky to have a very large family. I got 6 brothers, 3 sisters, and we always had these great big Victorian houses or Edwardian houses that had every little gardening gadget that was kind of trendy then, whether it's a hot house, cold house, furnace for heating stuff, a rock garden. And we just explored them as if everybody had these kind of gardens, and it's not the case. So here am I looking very envious of my brother Henry, my older brother, who's got a much better buggy than I have. Right. Only one boy missing from there, my younger brother Phil, who's 50 this year. This is me here. My mother adored gardening. I think probably it was escape from the craziness of having all these children going crazy around the house, fighting with each other. So it was her way of just relaxing, of getting outside. It's her space. And we were obviously involved in it from a very, very young age. Isn't it funny how they all wear these grey, I think it's a black and white photograph, but everything was very grey when you go back to the 1950s, certainly in England. The garden was one of those things where everything was actually much more colourful and bright and lively. Now a couple of points to go through. As I've got older, I've become much more relaxed with my gardening style. When I was training in England and when I was doing all kinds of things, we were very careful about straight edges, picking up things that are dying, cutting flowers back. In the end now, I've come, I suppose, because my own body's in that kind of decaying process, I'm much more comfortable with it. It is a natural process. It is recycling at its very essence. So I'm not worried about things going slightly askew. In fact, actually it adds to some of the enjoyment of my gardening experience, is I don't have to be kind of not anal about things, but I can just let things happen, let things become decrepit and enjoy it a bit more. The funniest thing I've got 2 young sons, 18 and 16, and of course they're involved in a lot of sports. They're on the field, they're on the court, they're doing all these things. And when you look around, you've got all these parents, grandparents, and it seems funny that the children who get enough exercise anyway are on the court. And all those relatives who should be doing the exercise are sitting in the stands, not doing anything. And I think one of the mistakes is that children need to have all this exercise. And I've certainly appreciated, I think it's actually much better to gradually push your exercise up to a maximum in your old age. Because I'm sure it benefits. And my GP, whenever I go to visit, which is like once every 8-9 years, he always says to me, Paul, it's the same thing. Every year I always find it's farmers and gardeners. They're always the healthiest people I come across. So if you like to garden, it is an excellent form of exercise. All right, the last one I have on there, obsession, compulsions. Thank goodness for that. Thank God we are all different. We are all driven to do different things because it makes eccentrics in the garden. And there are people who would do things I would never dream of doing, and we can learn or we can appreciate. Next week I'm off to do a WNEP thing on bonsai. And I couldn't dream of looking after some of these trees that may be 50, 60 years old. They need to be nurtured and trimmed and whatever. But they are fun to see. But there are people out there who love to do it. All right, I had this kind of catchy feeling, you know, like e-book, email, and it was, you know, it's a bit corny, but anyhow, with my e-garden, I picked up 5 E's that I think are kind of important in my gardening style. Effort, less. Now that's important. Effort less means less effort. It doesn't mean no effort, which a lot of people seem to, you know, trying to work it into their garden. There's always going to be effort, even if you were to pave your garden, your yard, with concrete or with blacktop. You know it needs to be maintained. They come around with these people who want to put a sealant down, who've got to mend the cracks. It doesn't matter what it is, there's going to be some kind of maintenance involved. Number 2, environmentally conscious, enabled. Number 3, edible and extraordinary. I'm going to go through these as a way to lead, and hopefully I won't be going off in red herrings as I usually do. It will keep me within about 45 minutes in the talk. All right, let's look at some high-effort gardening and some low-effort gardening. Lawns, planting annuals, complex perennials are all hard work. Now the industry, if you ever look at the horticultural industry in America, it's called lawn and garden, L&G. That's because 70% of money spent on lawn and gardens is actually on the lawn part, on the machinery, on the labor to cut your lawn, on the raking the leaves off the lawn, the fertilizers, the insecticides. It's a huge amount of money. I'm not a great fan of lawns. What really struck me is I saw one of these overhead cameras. They've stationed a camera very high above someone's house. And a typical garden of maybe half an acre, 3/4 of an acre, and it viewed it during a week. They had this massive lawn. And the only person to go across that lawn, apart from the person who cut it, was the newspaper boy. So we've got this green mass we create for us and we spend a fortune on, of virtually no use whatsoever. It's not particularly good for the environment. We'll talk about that a bit later on. Any plants that involve high watering or vulnerable to drying out. We always get dry periods in our summer. I like my own drought here. It's best to choose plants that can actually cope with some kind of stress. Our environment here, this kind of mid-Atlantic stroke getting a little bit higher, can actually lead to dry periods, lead to wet periods, lead to cold periods. We should know what we're dealing with. And importing plants that need constant water, I think, is a bit of a mistake. All right, low-effort gardens. Dry gardens, gravels, mulches, some of the German styles that they have in their city parks are very low maintenance. They just come up, they seed themselves, they have a very, very natural look to it. Shrubberies, that's my favorite, being an English gardener, as it were. Shrubberies, you can hide all kinds of bad things in shrubberies. You don't need to mulch them. This current phase of buying yards and yards of mulch, and even worse, Penn State blue mulch or black mulch or red mulch or whatever, it doesn't really do much, I think, in terms, I like plants. The reason I garden is not that I like mulch or gravel. I like plants to be looking well, growing well, and doing their thing. Mulch is the antithesis of that. You know, I know a lot of people feel they have to mulch and mulch and mulch. But what gets away from a mulching is the shrubberies. Shrubberies tend to be broad and wide, and not like trees on a single trunk. They will cover an area. Their own leaves, if they're deciduous, or even if they're evergreen, fall down and decay and process. You as a gardener, if you do have a bit of lawn, you can get your lawn clippings and you can shove them underneath the shrubs. No one's going to see it, but if the soil is good and healthy, it's going to break everything down. So I use the whole of my shrubberies in my house just to dump organic material, and as long as your soil is very bioactive, it is going to break stuff down, and no one's going to know. You don't have to store it, you don't have to make a special compost heap. You're just doing what the soil does anyway, breaking it down. Self-watering gardens. We tend to get quite a bit of rain in this neck of the woods. I think Scranton gets an average of about 50 inches a year. That was twice what we got in my part of England, the southeast of England. We get about 25, 26 inches. But the way you think of it in the media, that England is always constantly raining and wet and miserable. So I mean, the water here, there's plenty of it. The problem, I think, is we tend to get more deluges, and it tends to run off. And what do people do with their runoffs? They point it downhill at their neighbors or onto the streets. Whereas what we should try and be doing, what nature does, because this is all natural woodland, is hold that moisture. Hold it in the soil. Now the interesting fact is, your lawn, especially when it's been compacted over many years of people running heavy machines over it, almost acts the same as blacktop. The water doesn't percolate when it's dry. It runs off, goes somewhere else. All right, enough text. Let's look at some pictures. All right, I'm sorry about the quality of this, but this is one of these strange things in England that we were dragged around to see and pay homage to. Just imagine my mum with all the 10 kids around. You look at these very strange used sculptures. And I remember asking, I think at Eva Castle, the gardener there, I said, how many years have you been doing that? And he said, oh, you know, ever since I was a little boy, I've been cutting that hedge. And it turns out that some of these hedges are 300 years old. They may not have looked like this, bits may have died, so they cut this bit out, and then somebody trying to make it more symmetrical cut another bit out. Do they do a lot for me? No, they don't. I mean, I used to look at some of these shapes with a fresh opinion and say, why are people spending 300 years trimming these things, and no one really quite appreciates what they do, except it takes an enormous amount of labor. And then you look around your neighborhood, you look at your neighbor, what are they trimming? Every year my neighbor gets out and does the worst thing in the world for a hedge, which is cut it to a taper down at the bottom. So the bottom will get no sunlight, will always be bare and sticky, but that's his duty. Twice a year that has to be trimmed. He makes like a little ritual out of it. What I try to do, in a kind of, hopefully not too rude a way, is saying that there are a lot of rituals and things that we do in our life that aren't necessarily, they don't make sense in terms of investment in the garden. This makes sense for the historic part of this garden, but not in my yard. Simple plantings. This was at the Wisley Royal Horticultural Gardens in England. Just a very simple planting of this hackone grass, which is a yellow-green, lime-green block. Little green box hedges. It's a small one, it won't get bigger than that. And some upright junipers. It is a little bit more dynamic, because this will come out and then it moves in the summer. It's a very cool-looking kind of green garden, but very low maintenance, very, very easy to grow. Well, I tend to like a more looser feel in my gardens. I tend to be more cottage-orientated. This is my house in Clark Summit. This is just an interesting border. It snakes down here. It has an awful lot of plant material in it. It doesn't necessarily have an awful lot of soil to maintain it. But I'm going to show you what I've done to make it easier. The more surface soil you've got, the more room there is for weeds to get involved. So we use a little bit of height. There's a horrible, you see some of these PowerPoint graphics with all these wonderful things. And you see something like this, which I created late in life. Basically, this is the lawn. It slopes down towards this bed. I put a retaining wall of large fieldstone in here, some good drainage at the bottom. What I've tended to use over the years is to incorporate this grit or sharp sand. You all know that we have these rodents that like to tunnel through soil. And the more organic the soil, the more moles. Moles aren't particularly a problem to your plants. They're actually more a problem to the lawn and the turning up soil. They're looking for grubs. They're not eating the roots. But unfortunately, there are voles that will eat the plants. And voles don't hibernate, and they can go through a garden very quickly. Whether it's perennials or trees, they can girdle a tree almost like a little beaver, going around it and kill them. So you've got to watch out. What I found though, over the years is that this grit, which is not a fine clay sand, it's an angular, chips, little splinters of rock. Any of those tunneling animals absolutely hate it. And they will stop, they won't go through it. It kind of, creates a little kind of barrier around your plants. Okay, so we have surface area. This is probably about 5 foot wide here, and we have about a 3 foot drop there. But in terms of display area, you can have the little mini trees that go up 6, 7, 8 feet. and you've got all this area to cascade down here. It's an enormous amount of room. I've spent a little bit of time with this soil. I've indicated here what I do with my edging. It's one of the pains of any looking after a bed in a lawn, is that the lawn and the weeds want to migrate into the bed and take over. Now you can buy all that plastic stuff, those metal edges, but any experienced gardener will know the frost will tend to heave them up, and it always looks like an old derelict car tire in your yard. You've got to put it back again, and then your lawnmower hits it, whacks it, chews it up a little bit, or you damage your lawnmower. What I tend to do is actually dig a very deep, every spring I come around, and the mulch that was in there, I dig out, I throw it on the bed. But then I pack it with brand new mulch every year, or every second year, depending on how it is. I'm able to run my lawnmower wheel on that mulch. So it does the edging for me. Because all the plants I have on the edge, it doesn't matter if you break a branch off or cut them back a little bit, they're so vigorous they come bouncing back towards the lawn again, and they tend to stop the lawn from migrating in. All right, that's its border kind of midsummer. And as you can see, you've got the taller grass there, you've got some shrubs, some perennials here, and then the stuff that cascades off. At the moment, it looks pretty, it's not a winter garden design. It looks pretty, the stone wall looks more apparent, but there's not really much here, but all of a sudden, it comes out. The nice thing is, it's a sunken footpath. We've got a little path that walk at, so you can look up. There's lots of ways of viewing a little strip like this. So you can look from the top, and then you get a pleasant surprise when you come around the footpath, because then you see much more of it. Gravel is a wonderful medium for growing plants in. If you've got any gravel footpath or anything like that, even if you've got a fabric underneath it, you'll know that plants, especially the succulent plants like the sedums, will root or seed in it, and before you know, you've got all these baby plants all over the place. There are so many plants you can choose that do well. Those ones that your neighbors give you, or if you go to a garden plant swap, there's buckets of particular kinds of plants. Those are not the ones to put in your yard, because they've often been overtaking someone else's yard, and people want to get rid of them. So bear in mind, there are some plants that are very invasive, and you'll be forever pulling them out. So what I tend to do is look, check plants out now. Are they good? Are they self-contained? Are they hardy? Are they disease-resistant? Are they good selections? And now there's much better advice. Before, when I first came to this country close to 25 years ago, there was very dubious advice around what plants are good and what works and what doesn't. And companies were quick to try and sell a plant right across America. And America is a huge continent. And they wanted to have plants just like any industrial production. If they could make just one product and sell it right across the world, they would. And they were trying to look for plants that they could sell. And often they did breeding schemes that weren't particularly well tested. And we had all kinds of plants being sold to us that weren't hardy, that would die out because they couldn't deal with, not necessarily the minus 15 degrees, but the up and down swings of a Pennsylvania winter would cause problems. But some new ones, some of these new coneflowers are absolutely beautiful, absolutely excellent, they do well.